So, we're going to talk today a little bit about how to block out and animate a dialogue shot. And this is really about how you approach a dialogue shot. Let's say you get a bit of animation and you're going to be doing some dialogue animation this week. How do you begin working with a bit of dialogue? This is the late, great Milt Kahl, by the way, working on a character from Sword of the Stone. Milt Kahl is one of the greatest ever of the Disney animators. So the trouble with animation, what is wrong with animation? The problem is we get nothing for free. Whenever you start animating, if you're a 2D animator, you start with a blank piece of paper. If you're a 3D animator, you start with a blank screen. Or you might import the rig, but the rig just kind of sits there and stares at you from out of the screen. You get nothing for free. You have to do everything yourself. And that means you need to have a very, very good and reliable work method. And hopefully what you will get from this course, the main thing that I can give you is a work method so that any time you get a bit of animation to do, you know exactly how to approach it. So the first thing to do is not panic. This is taken from the excellent Douglas Adams book, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. What you need is a system. And it's rather like an architect building a building. These are the plans for Brunelleschi's Great Dome in Florence. And Brunelleschi didn't just start building the dome, putting bricks on top of each other. He had a plan. And it's the same with animation. You've got to have a plan. If you just start posing a character in Maya, you will get confusion and chaos very, very quickly. So, number one, listen to your soundtrack. This is the great Mel Blanc, who did tons of wonderful voiceover work for Warner Brothers back in the 40s. He did Bugs Bunny and Elmer Fudd and Daffy Duck and all of those characters. Incredibly versatile voice actor. And remember that you share, as an animator, you share your performance with the voice talent. And they got there first. The voice actor really has the chance to set the tone of the scene in a way that the animator doesn't. You have to match to their performance. And the first thing you're going to do is think about it. Like Rodin's Thinker here, you want to animate you want to imagine the shot as a movie in your head. Try and picture it in your head. Try and roll back. I do this. I roll back in my chair, close my eyes, and I'll try and imagine it in my head. See if you can see it. Force yourself to try and see it as a movie, because that helps a lot to try and actually just imagine what it is that you're going to do. The next thing you want to do is act it out. This is me in the corridor at Escape Studios, acting out an action for one of the students. And you know, hopefully by acting the shot out, I don't say this is great acting, but hopefully by acting the shot out, you can get poses or the beginnings of poses, which then, you know, live action poses, which can then become the key poses in your animation. The next thing to do is write down the line of dialogue. And these are some notes that I made on the film Robots. And here, Fender is saying to Rodney, brace yourself, you're about to get very popular. That's the line of dialogue. And you can see here what I've done is I've underlined the accents. Brace yourself, you're about to get very popular. So the big accents there are brace and very. You're about to get very popular. Here's another one here. This is Mrs. Copperbottom saying to her husband, she's saying to Rodney, because he gets these hand-me-down upgrades, well, I think we got rid of most of the smell. And I've written down I think we got this, so there's an accent there. Well, I think we got rid of most of the smell. And what I've done here is I've got a little pointy up arrow there you can see on most. And that's because as I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking, well, that's going to be an up accent on the head. I think we got rid of most of the smell. So the head's going to go up on most and then down on smell. I think we got rid of most of the smell. And that feels natural. That felt natural to me at the time. Head up on most, down on smell. And you can see I've written down the number here of the frame number where these things are happening. So I know my thumbnail. I'm going to need a thumbnail pose here on smell, and then I'm going to need a thumbnail pose here at 29 or 129 on most. At Robots, we all began our shots at frame 101. Always 101 was the rule at Blue Sky Studios. And here I've also written down who's got the shot in front of me. That's 02060 is Dave Fig. That's Dave Figliola, very, very talented animator who's still at Blue Sky, I think. And 02030, that's John Wilson, another very skilled animator. So I'm already thinking about my hookups and who I have to fit it in with. But the important thing is to match the dialogue. And by this stage, you've imported the audio into your shot, so you know roughly what frame number the different accents are going to be at. So here we go. There it is again. Brace yourself. You're about to get very popular. And here's the other one. I think we got rid of most of the smell. So once you've done that, you're going to start doing some thumbnails. These are thumbnails by again by the great Milt Kahl. This is from The Rescuers. This is Medusa jumping on a chair and screaming, "Snoops, Snoops, a mouse, a mouse! Oh, kill it, kill it, kill it!" And you can see she's in a total panic here. And Kahl is exploring poses for the character to help him do his character poses. Here are some poses from Ursula in the Little Mermaid. There's a separate lecture all about the Ursula thumbnails. I think these are really, really good. And Glenn Keane is really the master of using thumbnails in order to guide his animation. Here's some thumbnails by me these are Boog from Open Season. When Boog is saying, "When I'm a bearskin rug, they can walk all over me. But until that happens, I ain't going out without a fight." And I've broken this down into sections here. So Boog is saying, "When I'm a bearskin rug, they can walk all over me. But until that happens, I ain't going out without a fight." So I've got different poses for each phrase of the line. And in fact, when I first got this shot, I broke it down into sections like this. Each section of the line has its own little accent. "When I'm a bearskin rug," so I know I've got a pose there at 123. "They can walk all over me." I know I've got a pose there at 153. "But until that happens," 189, "I ain't going out without a fight." And then there's a big accent at the end at frame 235. So that's how you start to begin to plan these things out. Then the next thing to do is to start doing thumbnails for him. "When I'm a bearskin rug, they can walk all over me." And he leans forward in towards Elliot. "But until that happens," and he's kind of leaning back now, "I ain't going out without a fight." And there he does this sort of big gesture with his fist. Now there were some changes to the final shot. Here's the shot as I actually animated it, and you can look this up on YouTube and find the shot. I stuck pretty closely to the thumbnails that I created. Thumbnails are really, really important. You've got to remember the power of body language. This is a Norman Rockwell illustration and we know what's going on in this pose. We don't need any words to tell us what's happening here. And actually, you'll find Norman Rockwell's drawings on the walls of animators' cubicles in big studios. And the reason that Norman Rockwell was so loved in America, and still is to this day, is because his work is narrative illustration. He's telling a story. People like artists who can tell a story. In a way, he's in the 19th century tradition of painters, which has largely been abandoned in fine art today, but still survives in illustration. There are no words needed to express this, and body language is vital. Here's a drawing by the great Cliff Nordberg, who was in charge of training at Disney Animation in the 50s. And again, we know what this character is thinking without any words. So even though you've got words to deal with, remember that the secret really is in the body language and the acting. Here's some poses by the incredibly talented Sean Mullen, who worked on the original Stuart Little movie. And these are his poses here. These are his thumbnail sketches for Mr. Stout. And these are the final frames. And you can see how closely his thumbnail sketches correspond to the final frames that he did. Now, you don't... Sean's a pretty good draftsman, and we don't need to be this good, but you need some idea of what your poses look like. Otherwise, it's very hard to create good character poses unless you've got a pretty good idea in advance of where it is you're going. And that's what thumbnails are really about. They're about creating a roadmap of where it is you want to go. Now, you want to be on stepped curves, typically, when you're animating a dialogue shot, and that's because you're really wanting to think in terms of discrete poses. So you think of it almost as a series of single still images or story panels almost. And you can change your preferences in the that's the preferences button that's down here on the right hand corner of the screen in Maya, and you click on that, and under the animation settings you change your curves to stepped curves. And then finally you're going to shoot a pose test. So you have all your keyframes on stepped curves. You time out the key poses and ask yourself, are these poses working? You know, do these poses work? Are they telling the story? And then you can go ahead and, with any luck, show that to the director. So when your poses are working, when you've got everything working, at the end of the shot, you can go ahead and spline it. But for now, try and get into the habit of working in stepped curves. It's how most studios expect you to work. That's certainly been true of everywhere that I've ever worked. There are, of course, exceptions to that. If you're working on a walk cycle or something like that, you wouldn't work on stepped curves, you'd work on spline curves, because you want to see the flow of the motion. If you're working on creatures, you know, scorpions scuttling, spiders running, sea serpents swimming, things of that nature, then you would probably be on spline curves. But for any kind of acting work, where it's more kind of pose-to-pose animation, then the chances are you would be expected to work on stepped curves. But it is useful to be able to get into the habit of working both methods. I remember we had a very talented French animator working at Blue Sky Studios on robots, and she was not at all used to working on stepped curves. She could really only work on spline curves. And that was a real source of friction between her and the studio, because the directors were used to seeing things on stepped curves, and they didn't like watching pose tests on splined curves. And it gave her a lot of trouble in the studio. So getting used to working on stepped curves to pose out your work is a very, very good discipline. So that is a general approach to approaching a dialogue shot. You'll notice it's not so very different to my lecture on approaching a pantomime shot. The only real difference between the two here is that you've got the audio to deal with, and you're breaking down the audio into sections. The work method is basically the same.